Okay, we should be live right now, guys. All right, the Duran Live 40. And we even have some music playing. In the background.
No, as it started an ad, I have the computer next to me. Someone's making money off of us. Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Before we are demonetized. Okay.
This will definitely get demonetized. I don't think there's anything about it because the topics we are going to be covering, two big ones, Hong Kong and Epstein.
Yeah.
Just by saying the word Epstein right now, the algos have automatically demonetized us. Actually, guys, every video we've done on Epstein, every single one has been demonetized. Even after we filed an appeal, they demonetize it. So anyway, let's see. Who do we have waiting here for Duran Live 43? If you guys can hear me, let me know. If the sound is good, if the picture is good, let us know in the chat and we will get underway. Hello, Valley. How are you doing? Valley, yes. Russian Ballet. Yeah, hello, Russian Ballet. Nene, hello from Detroit. Hello from Nepal. Paul Cameron, Peter, yes, of course. All right. Maris Pluto, all right. The Duran is here and it's live. Yes, it is. Hi from Malta. Let's see, Stratica. Epstein who? Epstein who? Is there a story about Epstein? Is he still alive somewhere? All right, hello from Germany. Stuart says all is good. Hello, Stuart, how are you? Hello from the Netherlands, from Canberra. From good audio. Okay, the audio is good. From Puerto Rico, hello. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Nigel. Hello, Phil from the UK. Helen, hello. How are you? Leanne, John, Colombia, South America. From Oman, hello, Mohammed. How are you? From Holland, from Iceland, guys. A lot of people. From New Zealand, from Latvia. London calling, and we have someone else in London. I'll start in reverse this time. I usually go Peter. We have someone else in London. He is the all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipotent Oracle of London, Alexander Mercouris. Alexander, how are you?
Well, I'm very well. I'm not sure about omnipotent, though. Very well in all other respects, and very pleased to be here.
All right. And we have in Moscow a man that does not need an introduction, but I will give him one anyway. He is the man, the mystery, the myth, the host of RT's Crosstalk, Mr. Peter Lavelle. Peter, how are you doing in Moscow?
Very, very well. You watch Greg Gutfeld too much because you're really getting good with those introductions.
I think he has better introductions than I do.
I think he has a lot of writers behind him. But yes, I'm doing fine. I'm still on vacation. The weather has gotten a little bit better, kind of a disappointing summer, unfortunately, but my apartment is almost finished. And that's the reason why I'm still in Moscow on vacation, because I'm basically writing check after check. I mean, it's expensive here to get it done, but it's getting close.
All right.
And watching the news flow, because wow, it doesn't get any more interesting than this.
Yeah. There is a lot that we could be covering, but my feeling is that we're going to be covering, like I said in the beginning, two big stories. One of them is Hong Kong, and one of them is the Epstein story, which is just an incredible story.
It's so incredible that it has spawned an entire industry of conspiracies that will probably never end in my lifetime. That's because of incompetence and lack of moral fortitude. Okay, on the part of the authorities and the elites. Okay, it's as simple as that. You know, if 10 things could go wrong, all 10 went wrong. Give me a break. Give me a break. Come on. Don't insult our intelligence. Tell us the truth.
And we have the first super chat from Refi00. It says, check out True News whistleblower Taref Simon. Yes, I actually have been on the True News site for Epstein. It's got some really interesting stories on Epstein. Andrew Moon says, top t-shirt, Alexander. Alexander is wearing the awesome Duran. Double-headed ego Polish.
Oh, here it is, yeah. And double-headed eagle here, but might I add.
And we are going to be talking East and West because we're going to be talking actually Hong Kong and Epstein. So let's get rolling. Which one do you guys want to tackle first? Epstein or Hong Kong?
It's Hong Kong.
Yeah.
You want to do Hong Kong?
Yeah.
All right. Let's jump right into it. To me, this is the big question. And just jump in, guys. Yellow vests, Hong Kong protests. Let's debate it. What are the differences? What are the similarities? How do you guys see these two different protests that are still going? Actually, the Yellow Vest is still going.
Go ahead, Alexander.
I think the protests are very different, actually.
I mean,
first of all, the kind of people who are protesting could not be more different. The kind of people who've been protesting in France are people who are from the small towns and villages of France. The people who are protesting in Hong Kong are being very much led by the intelligentsia. They are a lot of them are students. A lot of them are the kind of people who are very much the beneficiaries, if you wish, of the globalist political and economic order. They are completely different. The protests in France are very, very much grounded in social and economic grievances, resulting from the pressure that these people are suffering. The protests in Hong Kong are straightforwardly ideological and political. I mean, the people in Hong Kong want basically to see fundamental changes in the political system in Hong Kong. And I'm going to say something else, and I think this is going to be controversial with some of our viewers. The response of the authorities to the two protests has also been very, very different. The protests in Hong Kong, the authorities in Hong Kong and the authorities in China, well, the authorities in China haven't actually acted against them. The authorities in Hong Kong waited a very long time before they started to respond by bringing out the riot police. In France, it was far otherwise. The authorities in France brought out the riot police very, very quickly. Now, I'm also going to say something which I know is going to be controversial with a lot of people. The violence of the protesters in Hong Kong has been much greater and has happened at a much earlier stage in the protests than has been true of the protests in France. And they culminated in some absolutely hideous scenes at Hong Kong airport yesterday, when people were taken hostage, beaten up, there were steps taken to prevent them receiving medical treatment, despite attempts by other people. These are travelers at the airport to try to help some of these people who were passing in and out of consciousness. And I mean, even a newspaper like The Guardian in Britain, which has been a relentless supporter of the protests in Hong Kong, has now come out and said that the behavior of the protesters at Hong Kong airport, in the way they treated these people that they took hostage, was completely unacceptable, and that they behaved in a completely outrageous way. There has been nothing like that in France. In fact, in France, the violence has been overwhelmingly by the authorities and the police against the protesters, not the other way around. Last but not least, but of course it's not so much about the protests, it's about the way these protests are being reported. We can talk about that a great deal.
Thank you very much.
Saturation coverage of the protests in Hong Kong, unstinting support for the protests from Western governments, from Western political leaders. We've seen people, US diplomats, meeting with the protest supporters. We're no doubt going to be hearing much more about that. And of course, the media has been going into overdrive supporting those protests. In France, of course, we have an essential blackout.
Okay, I'll add to Alexander Maciaros's list. The Yellow Vests are fighting for the return of French sovereignty to the citizenry. Okay, these protesters with black masks and using violence in Hong Kong, they want to compromise China's sovereignty, and they want outside forces to bring that to fruition. One of the things that that Alexander mentioned, the media, Hong Kong, everyone, is part of China. It is not separate from China. It is Chinese sovereignty. Don't forget that. It's not stressed enough in Western media coverage. Now, another difference is that the Yellow Vests carry the French flag. Okay, they're fighting for France. Who in their right mind in Hong Kong will raise the old British colonial flag. What was democracy like in the colony of Hong Kong? You know what, you guys? There was none. There was a governor general that ruled by diktat. This is ridiculous. It's ahistorical. And, I don't seem to remember Putin showing up on Wall Street during the Wall Street protests, okay? But an American diplomat is in Hong Kong meeting the opposition. That's called meddling. I mean, for 3 years, the United States, the population has been inundated with Russian meddling, which was never proven, ever. And still has not been proven, but there's obvious outside meddling inside of the sovereign state of China. Now, let's be clear, everybody. China is nominally a communist country. It doesn't have opposing political parties. It has very stringent speech laws. It has probably, I don't know the exact details, stringent protest laws, okay, as far as assembly are concerned, okay? None of us, the three of us here, are going to wave the flag cheering on the Chinese. But the Chinese haven't really done anything yet. And I'll finish with this before we get more questions. Looking at the violence committed by these protesters, particularly at the airport, taking hostages. Really? These are freedom fighters taking hostages, innocent people trying to get in and out of the airport. And you're going to support that? My goodness, okay? What they want, in my mind, these protesters, they want a strong reaction from Beijing. They want their own part of China, Hong Kong, to suffer some kind of decision made inside in Beijing. So, I mean, what kind of people, freedom fighters, want to see harm to their economy, to the population? I mean, this is ridiculous what's going on. As far as the extradition law, yeah, it was withdrawn. It was withdrawn, okay? So this is an internal matter for China, as the yellow vest issue is an internal affair of France. So, you know, I think you should really kind of relent about the freedom fighters and carrying American flags. I mean, anyone, and the three of us have ad nauseum studied forced regime change scenarios. And this fits one remarkably. So before you take sides, look at things objectively and always ask the very simple question: who benefits from all of this? That's what we should be dwelling on.
Alexander, should the UK intervene? Because Peter is touching a lot about this stuff, and I'm looking at the chat. That's why I'm asking this question. And Peter touched upon the history.
Absolutely, they shouldn't. Why?
Because I'm looking at the chat, guys, and I want you guys to break it down. That's why I want you guys to break it down and analyze the situation as we're all discussing this. So I'm asking, and you know, maybe this is a simplistic question, but I really am asking: should the UK intervene?
No, it should not intervene. It has no role in this affair. Britain is not responsible for Hong Kong anymore. It left in 1997. It made an agreement with China. China has largely honored that agreement. This is an internal matter of the People's Republic of China and of Hong Kong. It has nothing to do with Britain. Britain has neither the power to intervene nor the right to do so, and it should stay completely out of an internal Chinese affair. That, by the way, is my consistent view about protests in every country. Each country should be left alone to sort out its own problems. Outsiders should not come meddling and involving themselves in the internal affairs of other nations. Whenever they do, it only creates problems for those nations that they meddle in. And in fact, I would add something else, that most of the people who are calling for intervention by Britain or by the United States in China, I don't mean you know, people who write on blogs and things, I mean people with political positions of authority, do not come to that with good faith. They are actually, when they say that the United States or Britain should intervene in these countries. They want to intervene in these countries. They want to intervene in Hong Kong because they are hostile to China in this case, and they want to cause trouble for China. And in fact, in this particular instance, they are trying to use the protests in Hong Kong to weaken China. Anyway, to answer your question again, obviously Britain should not intervene.
Okay, well, and I don't think Britain should intervene in the mass shootings in the United States. That's something for the American people to resolve, not the former colonial master. I'm sorry, I think it's a ridiculous question because China is a sovereign country. Am I an admirer of Chinese human rights? No, I'm not. And I don't speak up for that, okay? But this is an issue of sovereignty. And the way it is framed in Western media is that China has less than sovereignty. This is a very bad habit of former colonial powers, okay? When's the last time France intervened in Africa and it worked out well? Huh? Never, that I know of anyway. Now, Alexander Mercouris is right, because the former colonial power is out for a reason, and there's always the law of unintended consequences. You want to get involved in this? Do you want to pay the cost? I mean, China is a big trading partner. Hey, UK, you're in Brexit mode right now. Don't you want to have good trading relations with countries around the world? China is always one of the most important countries you want to have. Why do you want to meddle in someone else's affairs at your own national security and economic risk? I mean, it's just ridiculous on its face.
Peter, is the fact that China is a communist government, is that why you see so many people, railing on China and saying, I can't believe that Duran is taking China's side? Or
we're not taking.
Or everyone emotional. I know. I'm relating to you. I'm relating to you a lot of how people see this, because we're trying to analyze the situation, and our viewers are trying to analyze the situation. Right. We're trying to figure out what's going on. And my question is, does the communist factor?
No, it has nothing to do with it at all.
China being communist.
That is just a propaganda prop. Okay, and China is rising. It is consolidating, and a lot of people see their futures at risk because they don't want to see change. Change is inevitable. See, we get back down to the Thucydides trap. Okay, this is what it's all about, everybody. How does the United States and its allies manage and negotiate China's return? It definitely is return, folks. Know your history, to the world stage as a major player. And what they want to do, you just look at the National Institutes of what is it? What's the acronym all the time for democracies? Okay, well, what their whole
the National Endowment for Democracy.
Their whole purpose is that they're a wing. They're the propaganda wing of the CIA. Okay, I mean that was solidified under Reagan. Okay, it's really well known. It's not a secret, and they want to create a wedge here. They want to create problems for China's internal affairs, to weaken it when it's dealing on the international stage. This is very, very obvious. We've seen it over and over again. And like I want to stress again that it's the police versus protesters in Hong Kong. The Chinese military, while on exercises nearby, certainly may be sending a message. But I think the last thing they want to do is that. Okay, last thing. Look, Hong Kong is a pearl. Okay. And that's why the Chinese agreed in 1997 for 2 systems, 1 country. They don't want to see Hong Kong diminished in the world. As a matter of fact, just the opposite, because Hong Kong is part of China. And not only will this hurt the people of Hong Kong, it hurts China. And that's what outsiders want. I'm sorry, everyone, but not in my lifetime has American foreign policy ever supported democracy and human rights. Those are always props to go in and meddle in the affairs of other countries. It has nothing to do with the fact that China is a nominally communist country. You even from CNN, MSNBC, all the way to Fox, the impending collapse of China. No, that's not true. You want it to be true, but that is so divorced from reality. It's ridiculous. Look at the political realities on the ground and deal with them, and just hoping the worst is the best for you. We've seen American foreign policy, particularly since the end of the Cold War. That is a game plan of utter, complete failure.
Alexander, Peter, both of you guys I would say that you guys are probably the foremost experts as to what happened in Ukraine in 2014 with the Maidan. And my first question was, how similar were the protests in Hong Kong to the Yellow Vests? So I'm asking both of you now, Alexander, Peter, how similar are the protests in Hong Kong to the Maidan in Ukraine?
Oh, I think they're very similar. I mean,
I agree.
There is a very strong element of similarity. So many of the things that were being said by the Maidan protesters are being said by the Hong Kong protesters. The Maidan protesters were also talking about integration with the West. It called itself Euro-Maidan, as I have never forgotten. We had all the Western officials turning up at the protests and meeting the protesters there. We had Victoria Nuland handing out cookies to the protesters, just as we're seeing American diplomats meeting the protesters in Hong Kong. It's ideologically very similar. And the other thing is, the other thing I have to say is the violence. The Maidan protests, as I so well remember, were marked right from the outset by extraordinary levels of violence, which was sugar-coated in the Western media reporting, which pretended or claimed quite falsely that the violence was coming from the authorities and from the police, who in fact acted with extraordinary restraint to the point where they eventually lost control. And very much the same is reproducing itself with the protests in Hong Kong. I would add, and it's not widely remembered, that there was also within Maidan Square, during the protests there, during the occupation of Maidan Square, I remember that there was that they were taking prisoners and keeping them in detention. People were being roughed up, and indeed there was even talk of torture on Maidan Square. Not so very different from what we saw in Hong Kong airport yesterday. So I think the similarities are extraordinary. And just as the differences between these protests and the Yellow Vest protests in France are also very great. Can I just come back to the things that Peter was talking about China and perhaps ideological hostility to China being partly the reason why some people are supporting these protests. I have to say, and I agree with Peter about this, I think it would not matter what sort of government China had at this point of time. The Western powers would be very, very hostile to China, simply because they see China as the rising power. We see this with Russia. Of course, there was a lot of hostility to Russia when it was a communist country, when it stopped being a communist country and it started becoming powerful again. That hostility resumed with a vengeance. I'm afraid I no longer believe that these labels, communist, anti-communist, mean very much in these situations anymore. And if we're talking about China in its internal structures no longer bears very much relationship to the kind of communist governments that used to exist, certainly in the Stalin and Mao times, or even as in the 1970s and 1980s. We're talking about a radically different political and economic system in China, just as we're talking in Russia. But as we've seen in both cases, the hostility remains the same.
It's really interesting. I mean, there's been a lot of banter about criticizing the neoliberal order, and it is collapsing all around us. But it's not because of outside forces. It's the internal dynamics of neoliberalism that is creating the crisis. And the people that are the biggest defenders of it have to lash out at some kind of ideological position or stance and say, it's all happening because of them and them and them. No, your house is on fire because you set it on fire, not any outsiders, okay? And another similarity going back to the Maidan is that this is sustained. Again, this all started because of the extradition law, right? That the Hong Kong was going to accept allowing alleged criminals to be convicted or go on trial in the mainland. But that was suspended and withdrawn. But the similarity with the Maidan is that the sustaining the protest. I mean, what is really the goal? Can someone explain to me what the goal is, other than to protest and disrupt? That is the goal, as it was with Maidan.
Well, right? I think that in Maidan case, it evolved into a campaign for regime change. And I think something very similar is happening in Hong Kong now. I mean, I agree. I think the obvious objective now is to overthrow the HongOng government and to distance Hong Kong again from China, which is not going to happen. I mean, it's a ridiculous. It's a ridiculous.
How would that even work? I mean,
how would that even work?
It wouldn't work. But that's what the call increasingly is becoming. That's why we're seeing British colonial flags being waved around. That's what we're talking about. I mean, it seems to me increasingly it's becoming, it's morphing into that. And of course, by the way, something else about the Maidan protests, which is of course opposite to what you hear, they became steadily smaller as Maidan movement continued. And as they became smaller, they became more violent. And we're seeing exactly the same with the Hong Kong protests. They're becoming smaller and they're becoming more violent as the more militant elements within the protests remain and are no longer, to some extent, restrained by the more moderate people who had supported them initially. So we're seeing a swing towards radicalization. And of course, as protests become more violent, people become more compromised, they become more endangered, because they start worrying that the law will finally catch up with them, and that makes them even more violent still, because if they don't achieve some form of regime change, then they have to be very worried about what will become of them when some form of law and order is reimposed. So again, as I said, the parallels are very, very striking.
Okay, look, everyone, let's be very clear. Let's be very clear here. Hong Kong is a sovereign part of China. China will use whatever means necessary to maintain its sovereignty and its borders. Be very, very clear about that.
Indeed, and can I
very clear about that?
Indeed, and
Alexander, before you jump in, guys, if some people in the chat just stop saying, you know, that we support the murder of people and we supported Tiananmen Square and the murder of people and we're bootlicking China, guys. If you have an intelligent question, even to criticize our analysis, please send it to us. We have no problem debating views and viewpoints. That's what this show is about. But to just sit here in the chat and to say that we're kissing China's ass and we support the death of protesters and the death of people, is just, it's absolutely ridiculous. We're analyzing the situation as best we can. Send us intelligent questions, guys, and let's talk about this. Don't sit here and say stuff like that.
You know, a point of clarification here. This is a complex story. And it's getting more and more out of control. Violence is being used. People are being hurt. There needs to be a de-escalation here of all of this here. We're not bootlicking anyone here, all right? But I see this going in a direction where everyone will regret it at some point. And it's time for everyone to take a breath and stand back before you cross lines that everyone sitting on the sidelines, you know, you'll be able to go home and have dinner tonight. What about the people that won't? And Alexander Mercouris is absolutely right. When you push people to these extremes, then they find themselves in an unsafe situation, and it may force them to do things even more radical and more violent. Nobody here, and I hope no one watching this, wants that to happen, because I certainly don't.
No.
Absolutely. Alexander, I'm sorry I interrupted you. And yes, we can talk about Tiananmen. Absolutely. We've got Peter Lavelle, Alexander Mercouris, who I'm sure can break down Tiananmen Square as well as best as they can. Send us the question and we'll discuss it. Alexander, I cut you off.
No, what I was going to say, and it arose to what Peter said about China not backing off from Hong Kong. The other thing to understand about that, and I mean, I've been to China, I have friends there. I have I have family in China. The Chinese people will support any step taken by the Chinese government to preserve China's national integrity. I think that is something that people do not understand about this. The Chinese government on this issue has the very strong support of the Chinese people in China. Within Hong Kong, there is an element that is protesting, but the protests in China, the protests as they are seen in China, in the mainland of China, are not popular there at all.
Peter?
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, as usual, the media is trying to portray something that is very different than happening on the ground. All right, what we have now is the media is encouraging these. They may not say it directly, but they're encouraging violence and they're encouraging breaking of the law, and that is not playing a useful role. Reporting on facts that are happening on the ground is. I mean, I saw those pictures and videos at the airport. I mean, these are not Jeffersonian Democrats here, okay? This is really, I mean, and also an international airport is a security issue as well. I mean, if any of us get near an airport, you need to make sure you have your papers, identification, and show when asked by an official. You certainly can't have anything resembling a weapon. And these people are going in with black hoods and smashing things up, taking people hostage, intimidating passengers. I mean, this is not about democracy, not in my mind anyway. And what democracy are they talking about? Hong Kong has never had democracy in a Western sense. What are you fighting for? You're fighting for a myth that never occurred? My goodness, wake up. You know, all the people that are, many of these people that are behind it, and I think the Maidan analogy is very, very good. There were people on the Maidan fighting against, protesting against corruption and protesting about being disenfranchised. And they were right, but it was hijacked by people that used deadly, deadly force. Okay, this is what worries me, that it's being repeated in Hong Kong. There are people that have disagreements the way Hong Kong is run vis-a-vis the mainland. I get that, okay? But you're not going to get any of the things that you claim that you want by using violence and escalating it and trying to internationalize it. You're undermining the agency of the people in Hong Kong, not enhancing it.
Alexander, how is China different and Hong Kong different from the time of Tiananmen Square? How are these two scenarios different? I
mean, again, I think that there are profound differences. I mean, there are some similarities in that at the time of Tiananmen Square, again, I mean, those were essentially young people. I mean, it was driven by students, just as it is to some extent driven by students in Hong Kong now. But the point about the Tiananmen protest was that it was essentially played out against the background of a transition and a debate, an internal debate going on within China about China's internal direction. There were some people, some of the students, who wanted to go further than the communist leadership in China wanted to go, but it was very much an internal Chinese question.
Also,
I can remember, can I just say this, Peter? Yeah. I can remember the protesters on Tiananmen Square, for example, carrying the Chinese flag. I mean, they were patriotic. The large majority of them, they were patriotic. They were conceiving of themselves as representing a future for China. Eventually, the situation again escalated, and it all got caught up in a power struggle within the Communist Party itself, with some groups of people, like, you know, the Prime Minister Li Peng, being hostile to others, the General Secretary at the time, Zhao Ziyang. But as I say, it's a different scenario, and we should not compare the two.
Well, and also, right during the events of Tiananmen Square, what foreign leader was visiting Beijing? Gorbachev was.
Yeah.
And a lot of the students, a lot of the young people were inspired by glasnost and perestroika from a communist country, the Soviet Union. Okay, they were inspired by those changes. Okay, again, there isn't any evidence that these people were protesting for a Western-style democracy. They didn't even know what it was. Okay, but a fellow communist country was reforming itself, and that was the impetus of a lot of people. So let's get our history straight, everybody. Okay. All right. So I think that, we knowing more history will actually, people will have a better understanding and not throwing insults and slurs at everyone here. We're doing this podcast out of concern. I'm not trying to score any kind of ideological points at all. Yes. What points could they possibly be?
I think the other thing to understand about the time of Tiananmen, the Tiananmen Square, was that in 1989, economic conditions were very different. China was a third world economy. There was very, very high inflation, around 100% inflation. Well, as the economy was adjusting towards new market forces, there was also very, very real concerns about corruption, which were linked to this rise in inflation. And of course, the trigger for the protests in Tiananmen Square was the death of a Chinese communist leader who was the former General Secretary, Hu Yaobang, who was seen by many of the students as being more inclined towards reform than some of the more conservative figures who came after him. Now, I'm going to actually say something else. This is going to be controversial. I think that the events after Tiananmen Square essentially vindicated the economic arguments of the more conservative figures within the Chinese government, the ones who, in a sense, won out in the end from this power struggle. They wanted to slow down the pace of reform because they were concerned that the economy was spiraling out of control, and their restoration of economic order essentially paved the way for the economic boom that China then experienced from the start of the mid-1990s. As we saw in the Soviet Union, where it was the radical reformers who won out, the result there was an economic collapse. And there are many disaster. And there are many people in China who, of course, are aware of that parallel and who point it out. So, as I said, we're looking at two very different situations. The protests in Hong Kong are not economic driven. Hong Kong is a rich place.
Very rich place. And also, I think it should be very clear here. I mean, again, going back to the question, what should the US do? What should the UK do? When's the last time they got involved in the internal affairs of another country and it worked out well? Can someone answer that in the chat for me? I mean, really? I mean, this is a litany of disasters, and they're not disasters for the people that make decisions in the West when it comes to these countries. It's the people on the ground. And so be careful what you wish for. Okay. I mean, Tony Blair is a war criminal. All right. And look what he's been able to do. He made a fortune for himself. Okay. Look, George Bush Jr. gets to sit on his ranch. Okay. He should be put on trial too. These things don't work out well, you guys. No. So, I mean, before you start again throwing slurs and rocks at us, I think we're the ones that are being pragmatic here and being realist.
Absolutely. I mean, can I just add to what Peter has said? I mean, it's always very easy when something goes terribly wrong to walk away. You can say, if you are talking about this from New York or London or Paris or wherever, that, you can take the side of people who you seem to ideologically support. But if it all goes horribly wrong, which it has the potential to do, you don't suffer. It's the people at the place itself who do. And if you go to Russia, a lot of people there have not forgotten how they suffered as a result of the support that was given through the 1990s to all sorts of people who were called, as I well remember at that time, young reformers and liberals and Democrats.
And all those geniuses at Harvard, okay?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Which all went home with money in their pocket after they wrecked the economy.
Exactly.
Peter, Trump's reaction so far has been restrained. He sent out a couple of tweets and he didn't really mention much. What do you make of that? I mean, he didn't weigh in on it so far, that's for sure.
What's important to Trump? Trade.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to get anything in the way for his, because he wants a trade deal. He wants to be able to serve it up to his base. Okay, he wants a trade deal. I mean, as far as I'm sure as he's concerned, Hong Kong. What's going on in Hong Kong? He doesn't care. He is laser focused on getting reelected. Okay, that's a sideshow for him. I'm sure he's looking at the bankruptcies of farmers in the Midwest and looking at the disastrous situation of commodity prices in agriculture. That's hurting his base. He's going to attend to that way, way faster. But of course, we know that his underlings and people in his orbit are probably hip deep in all of this, okay? And I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm just saying my humble opinion, I don't think his advisors really want Trump to weigh in, okay? I mean, if you already have American diplomatic or foreign service personnel talking to these opposition leaders in Hong Kong, don't spoil their party, okay? I don't think Trump is engaged. I don't think he wants to get engaged. And when it comes to China, he wants a trade deal. That's what he wants. He doesn't want something to undermine it. And I'll tell you, I suppose people just don't understand. I too have been to China. They're laser focused on their sovereignty. They do not like outsiders telling them what to do. They are very, very proud. And from what I saw, they have a lot to be proud of, okay? I mean, they are focused on their future, a future that all of us here, the three of us, and maybe a lot of the viewers, that's not a future that they would want. And I can perfectly get that. I perfectly get it, okay? But they have to decide for themselves, all right? Our input, forceful input will only distort things and make things worse. History tells you that. It's obvious, as plain as my nose is on my face.
Alexander, how connected do you think are the protests in Hong Kong to any of the financial markets in Hong Kong or the financial strength?
I think
Hong Kong. I mean, you've mentioned in a previous video that we did on Hong Kong that at one point in the 90s, Hong Kong was the economic engine of China. And today, I believe it accounts for less than 3% of
GDP.
Of GDP. It's really gone down. Like 20.
Yeah, Hong Kong was the clearinghouse. It was the clearinghouse for the
other cities have risen to the top.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's now dwarfed by Shanghai, for example, and Shenzhen across the border from Hong Kong. It is much more important, much more pivotal to China's economy than probably Hong Kong itself is. I think that is a major factor behind the protests, incidentally. Back in the 1990s and 2000s and whenever, the Hong Kong people, a lot of these people, a lot of these students felt themselves to be an elite within China. Yep. Now they are no longer so. And there is this huge worry about the loss of status that comes with that, and the sense that whereas Hong Kong mattered a lot to China, and therefore China had to be very, very accommodating to Hong Kong and play along with Hong Kong. Now that it matters so little to China, the Chinese are gradually bringing it ever more closely under the Chinese central government's control. I'm sure this is a big driving factor, but again, this is an internal Chinese affair. And I would add that, of course, a lot of the points that have been made about how China restricts public protests and demonstrations and things of that kind, they have been true in China. They've not been true in Hong Kong, which have been allowed by the Chinese authorities far more leeway than other parts of China have had up to now. And I suspect that the long-term effect of these protests, however they end, is that leeway is going to be reduced as the Chinese decide that allowing things to be run by Hong Kong in the way that they have been up to now isn't working very well. So I'm afraid these protests could very well end up achieving the opposite of what they're intended to do.
What'll essentially, I'll put money on it. If it continues down the path that it is, the authorities in Beijing will nullify the two systems, one country understanding. They'll just nullify it.
Yes.
Okay. And I want to ask, since this is interactive here, does anybody in the chat think that the United States should use military force vis-a-vis Hong Kong? Can we get a quick yes or no from anyone watching? Should the U.S. use military force when it comes to Hong Kong? I'd really be curious to know if anyone thinks that the U.S. should.
All right, I'm monitoring the chat, so let's see some of the answers, Peter. While we do that, let's go to some super chats, because we have a lot of super chats on Hong Kong, and then we'll move to the other big story, a complete change of direction.
Change of direction.
And hopefully everyone in the chat will agree on the Epstein story.
Well, at least China is a country. We don't even know who Epstein was. Okay.
That's true. We don't even know if he's dead or alive, to be honest.
No.
So let's go to some of the chats as people weigh into your question, Peter. And well, let me read what people are saying in the chat. Rob says no. Jeffrey Long says no. Kimberly says no. Vivian says no. Annabelle no. Paula no. Ruby no. American Rebel sad but probably true, Peter. James Parker defect no, definitely not. No. All right, a lot of no's. A couple people say yes.
The people that said no, and I want to address the people that said yes. One of the things that's happened to our political discourse, that it's all emotive. It's like 90% emotive, emotional. Do I agree with the level of civil liberties in Hong Kong vis-a-vis China? They are different, but what's happening right now is that they're going to get closer and closer, and then the difference in Hong Kong will disappear. I wouldn't want to see that happen. I really wouldn't. But geopolitics, it's
going to have the reverse effect, is what
exactly. But see, geopolitics, in a realist sense, is that you do things that you know that you will get a benefit in return. That's called cold calculation. And instead of just saying I'm with everyone's a Hong Kong person, okay, that doesn't solve any problems, okay? It doesn't. Look at John McCain said, we're all Georgian. When he said that, I said, I'm not, because you're making it worse, John McCain. His entire political career made everything worse. Everything. To the last vote on the Senate, he just spites his own party and president on healthcare out of spite, out of emotion. And so you watch these media knuckleheads that have no idea what they're talking about, and they never have to suffer the consequences of their words. All right? Anyone can turn around and tell me and say, Peter, on this day you said this, and I'll say, if I'm right, I'll say I defend it. If I'm wrong, I say, yep, I was wrong. Okay? That's the kind of analysis we do here. All right? We're honest with people. I don't have an agenda, and Alex don't either. I know them well enough. Okay? So think about the fallout, the law of unintended consequences, and then I think you'd see things a little bit different. Would these outcomes be distressful or sad? Yeah, sometimes, but that's life. Life is full of tragedy and suffering. Okay, just don't make it worse. Okay, I think I'm sounding like Jordan Peterson.
No, you sound great, Alexander. I can see Alexander also wants to jump in before we get to the.
I mean, the one thing I wanted to add, and it follows from what Peter was saying about China, Hong Kong's autonomy. Now, we said it on our program a few days ago, which is, of course, it's important to remember that the autonomy that Hong Kong has is autonomy which Hong Kong was granted. Yes. By China. When Hong Kong rejoined China in 1997, the Chinese did not have to grant autonomy to Hong Kong. There was protracted negotiations with the British, who thought that they could somehow force their own views on China, and they found that they couldn't. And the Chinese made it very clear that they would decide what kind of autonomy Hong Kong should have, and they decided to grant Hong Kong very extensive autonomy indeed. But in 1997, there was no power on earth that could have forced China to grant Hong Kong autonomy if it didn't want to. And just as there is no power on earth, certainly not the United States, that is in a position to sever Hong Kong from China by military means, I think anybody who answered yes to Peter's question, it really needs to understand the military and strategic balance in this part of the world, needs some very, very quick lessons in this, because any intervention in Hong Kong would be a completely suicidal and even crazy thing.
Okay, let's get to some super chats and then we'll move over to Epstein. Great analysis, guys. Let's see what people are saying about Hong Kong. Let's see. From American Rebel, looking forward to what you all have to say. Don't see how things can end well in Hong Kong. Thank you for your super chat, American Rebel. Well, you just heard from Peter and Alexander. This is a very delicate situation. So thank you for that. Super chat from Stuart Walker. Super chat, your reporting is so refreshing. Thank you, Stuart. From Clara Wellen, 2 super chats. Thank you, Clara, very, very much. 2 generous super chats of $50. Thank you, Clara. From Stuart Walker again, £2 super chat. Good point, Alex. You should have more input. Thank you, Stuart. from misunderstanding.
That was to McIris.
Where are we? Let's from Louis Alfred Nicholas Gabriel. All right, super chat. As the logical conclusion of this will be increased acceleration of the integration of Hong Kong, London stands to benefit. #finance hubs, #Quibono. Do you guys have any comment on that?
I think that one must not exaggerate the role of the City of London in East Asian affairs. I mean, the dominant financial center in China is Shanghai, and that is going to develop very, very rapidly. Now, Hong Kong has certain advantages over Shanghai because it's more plugged into the international financial system. But I suspect that whatever business doesn't go to Shanghai if Hong Kong loses its position as a key financial center, will not go to London, it will go to Singapore, which is another financial hub in East Asia, which is very, very closely connected now to the Chinese economy.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing, it's just Hong Kong loses so much by going down this path. It loses so much.
I'm going to add something else. I think if Hong Kong is absorbed fully into China, London will be the loser, not the winner. Because, of course, London still has very, very close connections with Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is, I mean, it's not an extension of London. It is an independent financial hub. But London will lose one of its key partners in Asia. So I don't think the City of London would benefit from this. I think it would lose from it.
Okay, we have a super chat from Misunderstanding, DKK 100. Thank you for that super chat. From Valley S, $20 super chat. Thank you for that. Another super chat from Misunderstanding, DKK 100. Some argue the CIA is behind the HK protests, and this is part of a plan to tank the HK or even the whole Asian stock market that the US plans to short. How much is this likely to be true? Interesting comment.
If you go to the Chinese media, people there are increasingly speculating about this. My own view about these protests is that they had in their origin an internal cause. But I think that has been fanned by external meddling. Of that, there's no question.
I agree with that completely, yes.
Okay, thank you for that super chat, Misunderstanding. From Tristan Coates, €2 super chat. Alex's tea will come via Silk Road now, not Hong Kong.
Oh, absolutely. And can I just add that one of my favorite teas, which is Russian caravan tea, reached Russia in the 17th and 18th centuries along the Silk Road. So, excellent. That would be fine. I mean, bring on the Silk Road as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, we've got 2 super chats on Epstein. I'm going to hold off on those very, very quickly because those will kick into the Epstein conversation. So the super chat from LeChat and Lord Brett Sinclair on Epstein. 1 second, we'll get to those. And we have a super chat from D2 Theater 7. Peter, your thoughts on Kashmir? This is also a big news story. You sent an article today to us, Peter, because you're actually following this story. This is big news, but there's so much news flow now, Peter, that this is kind of getting crowded out a bit. But
yeah, well, this is a very interesting story, and it's extremely complicated. And looking at some of the Western media coverage of it again, these people just don't know very much about history. What Modi's trying to do is it's really complicated. It's a huge risk. It might work. It might not work. I mean, I've not seen this kind of political risk taking on the part of India in a long time. I mean, essentially taking away its autonomous status of Kashmir, it can go easily in 2 different directions. I mean, essentially what they want to do, and it's very, very controversial, is that it is a Muslim-dominated population. But with what Modi has done is it essentially allows Hindus to go there and settle and essentially just outnumber the Muslims and kind of force the problem to go away just by sheer numbers. Okay, and of course in India they have a lot of numbers. Okay, the interesting thing here is that when the partition happened in 1947, Kashmir chose, a Muslim-dominated province chose to go on the side of India because they thought that being a minority, they would have minority rights, which they did. Okay, and so this is a huge gamble that's going on. We really need to devote a separate video to it because I'd really like to go through a lot of points. I mean, because it's a fascinating story. But the cherry on top of it all, China has made it very clear to the Pakistanis and to the Indians, you're going to talk, and we have the weight to make you talk. Okay, the story gets a lot of headlines because it's been being sensationalized like so much of the news. But there are cooler heads out there. China doesn't want to see this go sideways. But like I said, changing the status of Kashmir is a really radical move, and it could spawn some very interesting outcomes that I don't think we're all prepared for, and I don't even think everyone has thought out. So it is a really big story, but I don't think anyone in their right mind wants a conflict. Pakistan is in no position to go into a conflict right now whatsoever. And of course, the Indians want to be able to achieve their political ends without high costs. So this is one of the reasons for suspending or taking away the status of the province. It's a fascinating story. And when I read the mainstream media, they miss it almost all the major points. They just, because it's emotional. Kashmir, it's like Shangri-La, it's like Tibet, No, it's not. Okay, it's not. Okay, it's really complicated, and I think what the Indians are doing, it really surprised me. I was kind of really just dumbstruck that they would go down this path because it's been a frozen conflict. It's probably the longest frozen conflict out there since the partition. Okay, Cyprus comes in second place, I think. Okay, but Kashmir is the longest frozen conflict we have out there, and the Indians are making some really bold moves whose outcomes I'm not really sure.
Alexander, do you have any comments on this?
Well, first of all, Peter's absolutely right. This is a very intricate and complicated story. But I think one point I would make about Kashmir, which is that, of course, people are talking about, this terrible step that Modi has taken to end autonomy in Kashmir. And they talk about it as if autonomy in Kashmir has been a great success. It has not been a success. Kashmir has been a center of a violent conflict pitting jihadi groups against the Indian authorities for a very, very long time, for decades. And the fact that the Indian government has decided that this isn't the way to go any further because the conflict is unresolved, and that perhaps ending Kashmir's autonomous status and introducing direct rule will actually make it easier to deal with the conflict. It may be a gamble, but I can understand at some level why it's been done, because the status quo wasn't working very well.
The interesting thing is here too, Alex, is that I don't think any of us really thought a unilateral move would move the needle. And I think that's what kind of all caught us off guard.
Yes.
Okay, because I think we've been in this mindset for so many decades of looking at some kind of negotiated resolution,
Yes.
but I never really put much serious thought into a single unilateral move, and that's what's so interesting and surprising, potentially dangerous. I mean, what the Indian authorities are telling as we speak right now, that they're trying to normalize the situation, internet access, telephone access, all this type of thing here.
Yes.
We have to keep an eye on it because there's more than one. There are many parties there, and they're all reacting to New Delhi's move, and I think that's being absorbed and digested, and we'll see what's going to happen. Of course, we're keeping our eye on it.
Of course we will, and I mean, it is something we might want to discuss in more detail in a proper video. But as I said, it is interesting that Modi has acted so forcefully.
Yeah,
and it's something that you haven't seen much of in India for a very, very long time. Indian governments have tended to be rather weak, and Modi's government, at least Modi himself, is clearly trying to establish himself as a strong leader for India, of a sort that India hasn't really had since Indira Gandhi was assassinated back in the 80s. So we'll see how it turns out. I mean, I'm not making any predictions about this. I mean, anybody who tries to predict what's going to happen in Kashmir, I think is going to fail, because predictions are so difficult. But I can understand the logic of this.
Me too.
Decision. Yeah.
You know, the interesting thing too is that another thing that we're going to be keeping a close eye on, having historical perspective here, when the state stokes a form of nationalism, in this case Hindu nationalism, you've got to be very careful, because once it gets a nationalist fervor gets to a certain pitch, it's very difficult to control, and Modi's got to keep that in mind. Okay, that when you use it as a political tool to your advantage, it can gain traction, but at a certain point it can take on a life of its own, and it's a life that you can't always control, and the Indian authorities need to be reminded of that.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's see, from Stu 218 super chat. Great watch collection, Peter.
You have no idea. You have no idea. There's only one angle.
All right, guys, let's jump to Epstein, but we're an hour in. Before we jump to Epstein,
hang on, just brief. I'm really sensitive, believe it or not. I hope that we have assured a lot of our viewers, okay, that we have more concern, and we have an analytical concern what's going on in Hong Kong, okay? I'm not going to condemn people that want to control their fate and want to have agency, okay? But as with the yellow vests, we cannot and we will not here support and promote and give fuel to people committing violence and breaking the law in the most egregious ways. We will not do that. I don't care about the political coloration of China. That is something for the Chinese to resolve, not for us.
Okay, great, Peter. Yeah, I think we're cool. I mean, our viewers are top notch, and this is a good debate, and the chat is really good.
We are very fortunate in the quality of our viewers. Yeah. I mean, obviously, we have some people who are not going to be happy with some of the things which we say, but that's fine.
That's fine. That's fine. It's all in the spirit of having this channel and having this this debate here, and this live stream is to air out all our views and all our opinions.
Yes.
If I can make one point, just to kind of prove a point, sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Dalai Lama the adored Dalai Lama, okay, in Hollywood, and all these bonehead actors, what's that guy's name? I'm getting old. I can't remember the actor that really loves him so much. Anyway, Richard Gere, right?
We did a video on
Mr. Gerbil guy, I'm told. The Dalai Lama's brother worked for what organization since 1957? Any takers? The CIA, public knowledge, okay? I mean, the Dalai Lama is not what you think he is, okay? He can have his spiritual ideas, that's all cool with me. But politically, when he was there as a young boy, it was run as a medieval fiefdom, okay? And so glorifying Tibet as this some kind of ideal is absolutely rank stupidity, okay? Don't let people pull the wool over your eyes, okay? And again, Western capitals love to use these terms, democracy and freedom and all of that. I need empirical evidence where it's ever been true, okay? It's always been used as a cudgel for power, okay? And the same thing is happening out in Hong Kong. God forbid there's any more violence. Please, for the sake of the people of Hong Kong. I rest.
Yes.
The prosecution rests.
All right, we rest. Let's move on. And yes, Peter, we should do a show on Kashmir.
Oh, absolutely.
Probably
it's
a lot
very,
of shows on Kashmir.
Very, very, very interesting subject. A very interesting part of India, by the way. Tremendous culture, and I believe that Jawaharlal Pandit Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India, of independent India, came from there. And of course, it has a tremendous history behind it, and it was a very beautiful part of India too.
All right, let's see. We have a super chat on a comment on Hong Kong from SM. I have family on a U.S. military base near China. Bases are on high alert because of the Hong Kong conflict. U.S. would only take action if Japan, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam allies were at risk.
I'm sure that's right. Actually, I can't imagine Donald Trump sending the U.S. fleet to Hong Kong. I think that is the one thing.
Yeah,
he's not going to do. I mean, he's not.
I don't think Taiwan and Japan or Philippines. Nobody wants to get involved in this here. Okay, that's the problems with these ridiculous alliances. When you have Hong Kong isn't even in an alliance with the United States. I mean. What it's a tripwire to pull everyone in, and it ends up being a fiasco and a catastrophe. All right. Certainly hope nobody in their right mind in the Pentagon is thinking about using the military now. Oh my God.
Yeah. All right. A super chat from Stuart Walker. Yes, Peter and Alexander are very smart. I would like to hear more of Mr. Christoforou. Well, here you go, Stuart. Before we get on to Epstein, I would like your thoughts on two off the path kind of topics: the hunt.
Okay, good.
And Mr. Fredo, Chris Cuomo. I'm actually drinking a Fredo espresso, which is a very popular drink. Alexander, you know this. A very popular drink in Greece, Cyprus, and Italy as well.
Oh, absolutely.
So, guys, real quick comments on these two trending stories, and then we're going to move to Epstein. We have 3-4 super chats in queue on Epstein, which is going to be another.
It was my idea for the hunt, so I'll jump in with the hunt. As everyone knows, I don't know what was it Universal? I'm not sure.
Universal. I think.
This film coming out, The Hunt, and essentially the premise is that you have these blue state liberals literally hunting as sport, red state Trump supporters, and it's been withdrawn. I saw the trailer. I was stunned, but then when I thought about it, I'm not stunned. And I think what's really interesting about even making a film about people killing and hunting down other people is nothing new. It's a genre in Hollywood, okay? But to overly politicize it was really quite shocking to me. And it shows me the ideological blindness of Hollywood. Is that they believe so much, they'd spend millions and millions of dollars to make a film about killing half the population over political reasons. And it was a wake-up call for them. It's like, oh my goodness, it was a moment of self-reflection that the country needs so much of right now. When you look at your political opponent as an enemy, you're in a very, very bad place. And the nominal reason why it was they decided to withdraw because of the recent spat of shootings in the United States. I think that's a cover for them, because I think when they realized that this would just infuriate the entire public. And of course, Hollywood does unfortunately influence weak minds, and who knows what kind of copycat effect it would have had. This is such a vile moment in Hollywood's history, okay, and that's saying something, that Hollywood would invest time and money to divide the country even more. And they're the liberals that are always saying it's the other side that's doing it. These are not conservatives making this film. How, what you could put all conservatives, Clint Eastwood and who else in a phone booth. There you got all the conservatives in Hollywood. Okay,
James Woods and Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, that's right. There you go. Yeah. And what is it? Magnificent Mel. What's it? Gibson. Mel Gibson. Also. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So it's liberals making this, trying to make money off of dividing the country. Thank goodness they withdrew it. I really just wanted to have my piece on that. Okay.
Well, that's a good segue. You have any comments, Alexander, on these two stories?
I have to say, the Hunt thing seems to me absolutely incredible. I mean, that anybody should even be thinking of filming this film it is bizarre. I'm just trying to imagine a film here in which Labour people go around hunting conservatives. I mean, the mind reels, and it does say something about the political situation in the United States at the moment. I mean, or so it looks to an outsider. I mean, even if this was intended as some sort of joke, which I'm not sure
it wasn't.
It was. I mean, that's the point. I mean, if it's meant seriously, it's bad. If it had been a joke, it would still have been bad. I mean, it's terrible that people think in this way and talk in this way. And frankly, one does wonder, where is all this going in the United States when people talk in this fashion? I mean, I find it very, very strange.
Yeah. What do you guys bet? What do you bet it will be leaked or stolen? It'll be put online, and it will just go completely viral, and because it's already out there. Okay, I wouldn't be surprised if this story isn't finished yet.
Yeah.
Well, going from Hollywood to Epstein is not a big
not a big leap.
It's not a big leap, and I believe it was a New York Times journalist who actually did an interview with Epstein, and he didn't release it. And now that supposedly Epstein's dead, supposedly he was able to release parts of his interview. And in his interview, he actually says that a lot of Hollywood and Silicon Valley were very much involved in Epstein's pedophile network. And that was actually astonishing to get that.
Yeah, but it
Silicon Valley. Yeah,
it proves our point, though, why Hollywood hasn't spoken out about this.
Exactly. So let's get to Epstein. And let me kick it off with some super chats, guys, on Epstein, because this is going to take up probably the second half of the show. And the super chat is from Lechat. Do you think that any of Epstein's victims are in danger to have an accident?
If I was one of his victims and I was a potential witness, I would be very careful and very nervous at the moment, and I would be going to various people who I am sure can provide help and protection. There are such people in the United States, of that I have no doubt. Now, I don't want to feed rumors and theories in what is already a very fraught situation, but until we get a proper explanation of how Epstein came to die, and we have not had that, we're getting more and more increasingly strange pieces, bits and bobs of information coming out. Of course, there is going to be that concern. And I think that's why we need to have this information, and we need to have it quickly. We haven't even had an autopsy yet.
Well, I'm sorry. I'm just going to say the obvious thing off the top of my head. I mean, how long does an autopsy take to determine you hanged yourself? I mean,
Well, as I understand it, Peter, the autopsy has already taken place. There is already an autopsy report. The point is, it has not been published.
Well, one has to ask why.
They say it was inconclusive, though, don't they? Or at least that
Well,
was what was floating around.
Alex, even if it is not conclusive, still publish it. I mean, in this kind of situation, you need transparency. You need to get the sense that the authorities are looking into this thing properly and are sharing the information as it comes out. They're not doing so. Why?
It's very interesting, isn't it, you guys? This is just my opinion, but this is an extraordinary test for Barr.
Yeah.
Okay, because he's publicly made him the head of clearing this mystery, clearing it up, and is he going to have underlings doing what he orders them to do? I mean, this is classic right now. You know, Trump. Look, Trump takes away the security clearances of like John Brennan, and then we find out, 6 months later, it was never taken away because nobody in his orbit followed his orders. So, Barr is really in the spotlight right now, and a lot of people like us are expecting a lot from him. And so we need to have clarity on this, or this is going to go. This is like the JFK conspiracy, moon landing. I mean, there's a huge industry around it. Okay, and
Absolutely.
I'm just very frustrated by it all because it's far better to admit mistakes and like someone said to me a few hours ago, if there were 10 fail safes, all 10 failed, then why do you have these fail safes?
Well,
I mean, you have to explain to people why, because there's such a lack of confidence in authorities right now and the political elites. This story is not going to go away, no matter what you see on the mainstream airwaves. It's not going to go away.
No.
Alex, that's a great point, Peter. Alexander, the reputation of the DOJ hinges more on clearing up Epstein, the story behind Epstein, than it did on Russiagate. True?
No, not true. I think
The public
I
perception, we have Peter says true, you say not. Let's hear it.
I think they are both equally important.
Okay.
And they are two sides of the same coin. Both point to a fundamental systemic failure within the Justice Department, criminal justice, a prosecutorial and custodial system. And I think that if Barr really wants to straighten out the problems in the criminal justice system in the United States, he has to deal actively with both. He's got to deal with Russiagate and he's got to deal with Epstein. I wouldn't personally prioritize one over the other. Perhaps Epstein has more traction at this moment in time with the American people because obviously there are such obvious victims involved and one is concerned about them. But in a sense, Russiagate is every bit as insidious. If the intelligence community of the United States is so far out of control that it is helping, it operated in the way that it did in the 2016 election, essentially to assist one presidential candidate against another, then that is a very serious matter indeed. And for the constitutional health of the United States, it needs to be sorted out also.
Yeah, but there's a difference here. I mean, it's prioritizing. Okay, I agree, but who is making who's making what a priority? I mean, the media or certain political forces. I mean, they can drive the narrative here. I just quibble with Alexander McKeer. Just a quibble here is that Barr inherited Russiagate.
Yeah.
Epstein happened under his watch.
Oh yeah.
I think there's that difference there. Okay. I think that's an important difference that we have to keep in mind here, because it's really incumbent upon him, and relatively soon, to make sense of this story here.
Yes.
Okay. He really has to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, of that, there's no question. I mean, his reputation is going to be affected by this. He's got to find out what happened, and he's got to do so fast. And clearly, there is resistance at various levels to finding out what happened. I mean, it's not enough just to sort of transfer the water and to sack people. You've got to have a proper criminal probe into this. I'm not saying that charges will necessarily follow or would be justified, but this is negligence. If that's what it is, by the way, and I'm making assumptions, if it is negligence, then this is negligence on such a scale that we need to find out how and why all those 10 or 20 or 30 fail-safes all failed. And of course, if it is something other than negligence, we need to know that also. And an investigation is the way to find out.
The interesting thing here, and I'm just kind of getting out there, is that if this isn't resolved relatively quickly, the people that will pay the highest cost are the elites themselves.
Yes.
Because this whole body count thing is just so ridiculous. You know, these dueling hashtags on Twitter here.
Yes.
I mean, the elites lose because people look. I think at this point, most people find Russiagate to be more or less a sideshow. I mean, I think God bless Sean Hannity that he wants to keep going after it here. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of dropped off the radar. But this story with Epstein is very different because in many ways, the political dynamics of it kind of disappear for a lot of people when you look at the narrative of what we're being presented. And it's just a ghastly story.
Yes.
And I've said from the very beginning, I think the last appearance Alexander Christoforou was on Crosstalk, is that, you know, and you were the best guest by a long shot, is that there are so many people were in Epstein's orbit. Now, we really need to know what their involvement was. And Barr has made it very clear that, you know, accessories to these alleged crimes will be pursued. Okay.
Yes.
And this is what makes it still very particularly dangerous for people that were in that orbit, committed misdeeds, crimes. In many ways, this is not, the story won't go away. It's really going to be up to Barr how it's managed. And if he doesn't manage it well, it will come back and bite all of the elites, and people will react to it because the narrative of the story is so abhorrent to most people. It's not a Republican Democrat thing. Yes, I know on Twitter people want to do it. I don't care about people on Twitter. There's such a tiny minority of people in the body politic. They're overrated, okay? But a lot of people, when they see these stories, they just say, what? Huh? He got away with that for so long?
Yeah.
How many victims? And this Maxwell woman is still wandering around. And what it took till after this apparent suicide that the island was searched. I mean, why wasn't that done on the same day that Epstein was arrested? I mean, I'm just putting out facts right there. I'm not saying I have any answers at all. I don't. I'm just bewildered by the facts that are being released. I'm just completely at a loss.
Well, indeed.
Okay. I mean, look, you know, we had, you know, what was it? Stone's apartment was surrounded at 6 o'clock in the morning with APCs, okay? And they're going after a big mouth, okay? A braggadocio. But this stuff that's coming out is that, you know, you're going after people in Trump's orbit for doing silly things. And then you have this guy that was convicted of being a pedophile in 2008. And he's still out on the loose here. I mean, a lot of people are asking, how in the world is that possible? And then he suddenly ends up dead in one of the highest maximum security prison probably in the country. I mean, inquiring minds are asking very basic questions, and these are fair questions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the chat right now, Alexander, and it's really interesting, and I kind of agree with it because, you know, there's a lot of talk. Barr is in on it. He's part of this elite group. You know, if he doesn't get to the bottom of it, but my point on this is, if he doesn't get to the bottom of it, he does tarnish.
That's my original point. It was my original point.
He does. And can I make a point, which is, of course, about Russiagate? Again, the distinction between Russiagate and Epstein. And I'm not, by the way, retreating from my previous point, that they're equally important. But of course, Russiagate, the victims of Russiagate, people like Flynn, people like Carter Page, people like even Papadopoulos, they're all members at some level of the American elite. These are well-connected people. The thing that is really terrible about the Epstein affair is that the victims there were non-elite people. They were vulnerable children who were being preyed on by an elite individual with the collusion of the rest of the elite, or at least...
And presumably protection.
And presumably protection. Now, if that doesn't get investigated properly, given the atmosphere in America, which, we were previously talking in this program about, people going around hunting each other and terrible things like that. But given the feeling in America that the elites are all about themselves and they don't care about the American people anymore, if this continues, if this persists, that, working class young American girls can be preyed on in this way with impunity, and that when something happens, it's all tidied up and the perpetrator is quietly dies and we don't really look into this. If that idea takes hold, it will be very, very corrosive for a trust in America, which is already in decline. And that's what himself will be at the center of it, obviously.
And that's what 2016 was all about. Now it's on the same thing, but on steroids. Yes. Seriously.
Yes.
And people in the chat, you guys are exactly right. Barr is doubly exposed because his father is connected to Epstein by giving Epstein essentially the teaching job back when Epstein was 22 or 23. I forgot the name of the school, but a very elite school in New York, and it was Barr's father. Now, of course, it doesn't mean
Epstein had no
coincidence, but
diploma.
there it is.
He had no diploma. He had no credential to be in that elite school.
Well, this is where we start to ask the questions about Epstein. How does he become a teacher in an elite school when he leaves college without a qualification?
Why did Barr hire?
There are all sorts of questions. Well, of course, Barr's father had connections with the intelligence agencies. If you want to make that kind of connection, go ahead and do so. I don't know. I don't know the answers to these questions.
Okay, let's take a step back here. That's a valid question, but I want everyone to know watching this, we're not saying that there was some kind of grand timeline thing here. Not at all. No. Not at all. Okay. No. But these are facts in the public square.
Yes.
And they need to be. I think that we have a right to know how this. If there's a timeline, how did it work? Okay. How are these people related to each other? Okay.
Exactly.
Because I'm not on a witch hunt. Not on a witch hunt. I think we can all say, we can all listening, all of us, all of you watching, and the three of us talking here, is that I think what binds us all together is there has to be some kind of resolution, some kind of justice that is served here. That's what we want most of all. Yeah. Everyone knows my attitude towards the elites. I hold them in disdain, complete disdain. Okay, if they go down, that's just fine with me. But I'm so sick and tired of this dual justice system, and I think I can speak for the vast majority of people. They're tired of it too.
Yeah, the Dalton School. That was the name of the school. Thank you, everybody in the chat, for pointing that out. Let's get to a super chat on Epstein. Alexander from Lord Brett Sinclair. Will Epstein's suicide murder flight, could be one of those three, be the end of these girls' fight for justice? And where is Ghislaine Maxwell, and why isn't she under arrest? I don't even know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly.
I just say Maxwell because I can't say it.
My understanding is that it's Ghislaine, but I've now been told that I'm wrong. So let's
S is silent, or I'm not sure. Anyway,
whatever.
Question: Where is Miss Maxwell, and will these girls find justice?
I have no idea where Maxwell is, and I'm going to say something about that. I wouldn't be too worried about this. I am sure that the authorities can find her, and given the kind of person she is, I'm sure she has a phalanx of lawyers who are representing her. I think that we shouldn't let our imaginations run away with us and think that she's hiding somewhere. A person like that can't really hide and can't really escape, if that's what people are afraid about. I think if she hasn't been arrested, it's because this investigation is probably still in its relatively early stages. Now, having said that, I'm going to say something else about the investigation. I absolutely hope that Epstein's death does not bring it to an end. Barr has said that it won't bring it to an end. There is no intrinsic reason why it should be brought to an end. As Barr has himself said, and as we have said previously in our programs, Epstein was at the center, or perhaps he wasn't at the center, but anyway, he was involved in what was clearly a large network and organization. Many, many people were involved in his activities. If those activities were criminal, which they, everything we're hearing is they were criminal and in a very serious way. Some of those people are his accomplices and his co-conspirators, and the investigation should be brought against them and charges should be brought against them if they have done wrong. I am not naming names. I am not setting aside the presumption of innocence, which every individual is entitled to. But if what we've been hearing about Epstein is true, then that investigation should go on. And the fact that Epstein himself is out of the way, given that he had a double jeopardy defense, ought in fact to make this investigation in some ways easier.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I'm hearing from the chat, it's Ghislaine.
Ghislaine. Well, some people, yeah, okay, Ghislaine.
Okay. All right. Peter, super chat. Let's see, where are we? From Katie, source of Epstein's money, Wall Street crimes, question mark.
We don't know. We don't know. We don't, as far as we know, he never had any financial transactions that are known to the public. Alex, you pointed this out on Crosstalk. I mean, I think you've put it really well. Once we know who the man was, then we'll know what happened, because we know so little about him.
Why can't we find out, Peter? Why can't we find out who he is?
Well, can I just say about this?
It doesn't make any sense to me. This is a very high profile guy. All we know is at 22, 23, he was at the Dalton School. Barr's father hired him. He was a teacher. He went to Bear Stearns. And then after that, it's like it's, a 30, 40 year.
And apparently he left Bear Stearns under bad terms.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So we don't know. Look, we're repeating ourselves here, but his mansion in Manhattan, there's no financial transaction that is known at this point. Is how he acquired it.
Yes.
He was given it. Really?
Yes.
There's no deed that Epstein owns it. It just owned it. He lived there. Okay. I mean, and his connections to Victoria's Secret. I mean, I don't know the gentleman, Wexler, I think his name is.
Wexler.
I mean, he apparently, I read this in Zero Hedge, said Epstein, stole or connived to take out $43 million, if I'm remembering. I mean, how many people miss $43 million? That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And and he didn't seem particularly upset about it.
No.
That was weird too. I mean, we don't know how was he really a millionaire?
Yeah.
Was he a billionaire? I mean, just because the mainstream says it, I don't know. Okay.
Yes.
Or did he just have an unlimited expense account that someone was bankrolling him? I mean, he just had the cards and he could just spend all he wanted. We don't know.
No.
Have you ever seen anything like this in your experience?
No, I was going to say, I mean, I've been trying to make sense of Epstein's biography, and it doesn't make sense. He goes from one extraordinarily glittering job to another, And one, there doesn't seem to be any real connection between them, and two, there doesn't seem to be any real substance to them. And he is a very, very strange person. And I'm not going to try and speculate and give answers because I don't have any answers. But all I will say is I've never seen a biography like that. Never.
Guys, can I throw two scenarios at you? And I think one is the popular one, that he was an intelligence agent. Yeah. Obviously, people are saying Mossad. I think that's the number one choice as far as what's, intelligence agency he worked with. I've heard Mossad, I've heard CIA, I've heard British intelligence. That's the first option. The second one is one that I think may also be plausible, an eyes wide shut type of group.
Yes.
An Illuminati, a very type of group that deals not only in sex trafficking, but weapons sales, drugs. They could pipeline a lot of it into Europe, say, through Albania to the US. A lot of money here, a lot of money in this stuff. And that Epstein was kind of working that angle. So I would say either the intelligence community or very, very high level, very wealthy, very rich criminals, global criminals. What do you guys think of those two?
The problem I have with the second scenario, we can go back to the first one later, but the problem I have with the second one is that, I think I've said this the last time we convened, is that when you get so many people involved in something like that, there's always the danger of slippage, okay? So I'm not saying it's inconceivable, but it's not very probable at the same time. I mean, you're talking about an international cabal. I mean, that's like coming from the
very high level criminal organization.
That sounds
very
like
high level.
One of my favorite television programs on Netflix is Blacklister. It sounds like we have a Blacklister situation here.
Right.
I don't know. The connections to the intelligence community, working with Mossad. I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that the CIA would be particularly happy to see American citizens entrapped and things like that. I mean, if they wanted that, they could do it themselves, okay? And they use him as a conduit. I know Philip Giraldi has written extensively on this, and he is a 20-year veteran of the CIA. So, I mean, I'm certainly not dismissing his theories about this. It's just that there's just for neither one of them, there's a clincher for me, okay? Because we have such a void of information that those are just really speculative and they're not based on facts, okay? And I'll jump in when there's a more meat on the bones to make some kind of assessment. So I would be very tepid on both scenarios.
I basically agree with this. I don't think we have enough information. I'm going to say what I think about the intelligence angle, which is that on the facts that I have heard, I think it is unlikely. Like Peter, I can't really imagine that the CIA and the FBI would themselves be involved in such an operation in the United States in this kind of way. I don't see why they would need to do something like this. So that excludes American intelligence. And if we are talking about a foreign intelligence agency, and that includes Mossad, again, I can't imagine that the FBI and the CIA and all those organizations would sit by and let something like this happen in the United States, with all sorts of very important people in the United States being compromised in this way, and would sit by and let it happen like that. I think that they would have acted much sooner to put this kind of thing to a stop. So I am skeptical about the intelligence angle. As for the criminal angle, well, I mean, let's be very clear about this. When we're talking about Epstein, what we are talking about is a criminal conspiracy of some sort. Even on the basis of the things we have heard, there is a conspiracy of some kind happening, because clearly Epstein wasn't doing all this trafficking all by himself. He was clearly involved with other people. There were people
Good point.
who flew his planes, people who operated his houses, people who ran his television cameras and all that kind of thing. So we are already talking about a conspiracy. How big that conspiracy was, how it was involved, how it involves his financial side. These are unanswered questions so far. I mean, but we do need to have those answers.
The interesting thing is that we're not even close to understanding, was this the trafficking of the girls, was that the primary purpose? Was that his primary goal? Or was it a derivative of something else he was doing?
Yes.
Was the trafficking just, his sex fantasies and all that? I mean, was this the way he spent his time? Was it the focus, or was it a derivative of something very different? Yes. Again, we have such a lack of information, we can't even answer that. But I think it would, if we could get that determination, it would tell us a lot more about what's going on here and who's involved.
Yes.
Peter, in the New York Times interview, the Stewart interview of Epstein, which is now on the internet, he said that he was walking with Epstein in his New York townhouse, this $70 million townhouse in Manhattan. And Epstein was bragging about pictures he had with MBS of Saudi Arabia and how good friends they were. And he was very proud of that. Epstein was bragging about his connection to Bill Clinton and that they spoke regularly and how proud he was of that. He was also proud of his connection, I believe, with Wexel, that you said, the guy that has Victoria's Secret and the other clothing lines, who's, I think, worth $4 or $5 billion. And he was bragging about his connections to Silicon Valley, tycoons, and very wealthy, powerful people. He didn't name names. How does Epstein get there, in your opinion? How does this go from a barrister to connection?
No. Listen, be careful here. Just because Epstein says that, we don't have to take it as gospel truth. Okay, I mean, he sounds like a braggart. Okay, he's a braggart. Okay, but the thing is that go back to what you said months ago.
Well, we know Clinton did fly with him. That we know.
Yes, we know a lot of. We know a lot of people were in his orbit. We don't know exactly why they were there and what they did, okay? Because we have a presumption of innocence here. But if we can understand definitively how he made his money, I think everything will fall into place.
Yes, I agree with that. What did they say in Watergate? Follow the money.
How do we find that out?
Well, there is always
find out how he made his money.
There are always money trails.
How do we do it?
There are always money trails. There are always money trails.
Tell us how do we go about it? Alexander, you're a lawyer. Yeah. How would a lawyer go about finding how Epstein made his money?
Right. The first thing you do is find out how much money he actually had. We have all the assets that he supposedly had. But
Peter said supposedly he has a house that wasn't even purchased.
Okay. So somebody owned that house before. In fact, it was Wexler. So how did Wexler cease to be in that house? And how did Epstein come to be in that house? Was there a money transfer? If so, when and where?
That is the key here. Yes. Because look, I mean, the war on cash has been won, okay? Yes. And that's the reason why they want to get rid of cash, is so they can watch how we all spend our money. So there's no way in the world Epstein was walking around with suitcases of cash paying people off, okay?
Yes.
You simply can't do that. I mean, people that have a lot of cash, good luck, buy gasoline and groceries, because that's about the only thing you can buy.
Yes.
So there is a financial electronic paper trail out there. It's definitely there, okay? And it is traceable, okay?
Absolutely.
And you really can't get around it, okay? People spend a lot of money with the shell companies and all that, but people are paid a lot of money to figure it out, and you can, okay? If you want to, all right? And that's what I fully expect to happen. If we know how the money was made, where it came from, even if it was from extortion or other means, you have to send a wire. There is an electronic footprint. You can't get away from that. You just can't return to the world of magic, okay? That's why we need to look into this.
Yes. Well, you've answered the question, Peter. I mean, that's exactly it. I mean, you find the money and then you trace it back. And that requires skilled lawyers, it requires accountants, it requires forensic examiners, it requires people to go out and speak to bank managers in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands and the Turks and Caicos and Panama. But, you know, such people exist. Formidable investigators are out there, and you can get to the truth. You can always find the origins of money. You always can.
I've been out of
the control, guys. Is this what Barr's tasked with doing?
Absolutely.
Well, that's exactly. The FBI has the means. They have the resources.
Absolutely, they do, and they can bring in people from all over the place. They can ask the big accountancy firms to lend them good accountants, and they can bring in people from the law firms. And of course, the United States, if it really wants to find out the truth, can force people in the Virgin Islands and Turks and Caicos and whatever to actually start providing details. But you can do that. And of course, it's quite likely, I'm guessing now, but I suspect that Epstein has used multiple identities.
Yeah, the interesting thing is, guys, is that the tools the authorities have, they can tell you more about your financial history than you can tell about it yourself. Believe me, okay? Absolutely. One thing that's always kind of bothered me about this, and I've been out of the U.S. for a very long time, so maybe things have changed, but how do underage women move around the United States taking airplanes? I mean, you have to have permission if you're a minor to fly on an airplane. Who's giving that waiver? Are they using real identities or are these false identities? And if they're false identities, who is creating them? Who's generating them?
Well, there you go, Peter.
And then plus, you know, fake IDs are pretty easily identified. Okay,
yes.
I mean, they have the technology right now. I mean, if they're authentic IDs, so that's even worse. Okay, because I mean, a fake authentic ID. I mean, these things trouble me all of the time. Is that if you're underage, you're not of age, and you cannot be moving around and doing things on your own. You have to have some kind of legal guardian to be able to do that. I mean, I think, you know, is it under 18 on an airplane? They have to put that little tag on you, and you have your name and everything like that. I mean, maybe it's all changed. Maybe I'm completely.
Well, he was flying. Remember, Peter was flying on private jets, and those private jets, many of the times, are different private airports. And from what I've heard, I've never flown private, but from what I've heard, it's pretty lax.
Oh, so you're saying like a young woman, a young American girl can be put on a private airplane, go to Paris, go to London, and get through passport control.
I don't know, but I have heard that it is a lot more lax.
It is.
Like, there's no checking of the suitcases. No. They don't go through any security or anything like that. You pretty much just walk on the plane. That's what I've heard.
Well, this is true.
If someone's flown private in the chat, let us know.
Well, this is true. And can I just say, I haven't flown private, but I've heard this. And I think you're right, Alex, but that creates its own separate trail. Because then, of course, in order to do that, you have to pay very large sums of money to various private airlines. I mean, these private airlines,
and these are witnesses. These are people who saw it with their own eyes.
Exactly, and of course, remember that there are some girls there, and people who no doubt be prepared to come forward, and you can find out an awful lot if you set your mind to investigating this, and if you have the resources to do it. The FBI has the resources to do it, and it's got the mind to do it. And it can find out exactly how girls were moved around, and it can find out exactly how if private jets were being used, how they were being paid for. And that goes straight back to Peter's question. Follow the money. And you arrive at the answer.
And Barr, everything's at stake with Barr. I'm going to stick with my assessment here, is that, this is one way for his opposition to take. I mean, and they're really mean-spirited, mean people. I've watched them on MSNBC and CNN, really vicious. And see, again, having a petty political objective will get in the way of justice. Yes. Watch.
Yes.
All right, let's get to some super chats on Epstein. Super chat from Richard Greenwood, $20. Thank you, Richard. Super chat from Lord Brett Sinclair. Ryan Dawson has produced a very good chart linking a lot of wealthy Jews to Epstein and Mossad. Well worth a look on this site. All right. Well, thank you, Lord Brett Sinclair, for that super chat. From Richard Greenwood, another super chat. Don't forget key elements of an effective cover-up. Number 1, the official story, the lie, suicide. Number 2, the true story, misdirection, murder. Number 3, the untold story, truth in plain sight, escape. And another super chat before I get your guys' comment from Richard Greenwood as well. Also, the delay in releasing the autopsy, according to the doctor in charge, is that examination results are inconsistent with suicide and are waiting for the FBI's input, something like that. So we have point 1, Peter Alexander, which is the official story. Point 2, the misdirection. And point 3, the untold story, which is that Epstein escaped, which is a very common and popular narrative that he really is not dead. Some people even put the photos of Epstein. Yeah, exactly. You know, they compare his nose and his ear. They're different. So what do you guys make of?
Well, I'll just jump in real quickly. I mean, and I tend not to agree with it, but if it's being presented to me, the escape scenario, then that is amazingly high stakes, and only people in very high positions would be able to pull that off. And that would have to be something that you would have to have an ironclad assurance that you'd be able to get away with it. I wouldn't want to do something like that. But that would be very strange. I think the comment about delaying the autopsy, that does make sense to me, because it doesn't concur with what we're all being told. And I said that when this story broke, we did a podcast, and I said, and I will stay with it, everything will depend on what the official story is and if people are going to believe it. And if it doesn't hold water, then hell will raise. Believe me.
Yeah.
Alexander.
Okay, just 2 things. Firstly, about the theory of Epstein escaping. If Epstein has escaped, that would require lots and lots of people to be involved in organizing his escape, just as Peter said, be an incredibly dangerous thing to do for those people.
If they got caught.
If they got caught. I can't understand why they would do that. What is so important about Epstein himself in person that they would want to get him to escape? Surely, I'm asking the question now, it would, if they can arrange his escape, it's much easier to arrange his death.
Yeah, having him dead is the what makes sense to me. That it's better to have a dead man than a man on the loose. Okay, because then you have the ultimate loose end. He's alive. Exactly. That's a loose end. Okay?
Exactly. You put exactly the words into my mouth, Peter. A loose end. Do you really want Epstein floating around in Saudi Arabia or London or Tel Aviv or Burundi, where he might one day turn up again? I mean, I think this would be a very, very strange thing to do if you are so concerned with silencing him that you can actually spring him from prison. Surely, assuming that kind of conspiracy happened, it would be a conspiracy that would want to put him out of the way permanently. That's all I get to say about that. Now, about the other thing, about the autopsy, about the non-release of the autopsy. If there are inconsistencies between the autopsy report and the official view that it was suicide, then that might be a reason for withholding publication of the autopsy report. But it is not a good reason. The right thing to do in a case of this kind is to put this all out into the open. And if there is an investigation, if there are inconsistencies, you say, well, there are these inconsistencies and we are looking into them.
Okay, now there's a scenario, and I don't know this scenario that well. I haven't really studied up on it. It's a super chat, and I don't know if you guys have either. It connects Epstein to Kissinger. The super chat is follow Kissinger. Epstein is his prodigal son. This is a developing story. SM, who sent the super chat, says, Jeffrey Epstein's Zorro Trust claimed 2 Mega Million Lotto 2008. Okay, 2000 Oklahoma, 2006. I guess NM is New Mexico. This is open source. Says MSM didn't report the first raid in mid-July on the island. This is also open source. So, I mean, I don't know the story with Kissinger that well. As SM said, it is developing. So I don't know it. I don't know if you guys have comments on this, that it was Jeffrey Epstein did have a trust, a Zorro trust. And supposedly he claimed 2 mega million lotto jackpots in that trust. I don't know. In the chat, let me know if I'm explaining that correctly as well, if you guys have access to this.
I have come across that. I'm not going to weigh in at all on that. Okay. And again, I'm really, again, I'm going to have to say it twice in the same podcast. Everyone knows how I feel about the elites, but I do not like bringing up names, making allegations. Okay. I need more facts, and Henry Kissinger is not one of my favorites here, but I don't want to throw him into the mix until we have something more substantial. Okay. Yes. I do not want to destroy people's characters. Okay. Because this is what the elites want to do. They want us all to go after each other. Okay. That's part of their game plan.
Yes, I agree with Peter, and I'm not going to discuss the Kissinger side because we just don't have any information. And I come back to what I said. We have to give the presumption of innocence to everyone. And Henry Kissinger is no exception in this case. I want to just throw out one possibility about Epstein, which is that he wasn't actually rich at all. And that, in fact, we're looking at another kind of Bernie Madoff situation of a person who pretends to be rich, manages to attract lots of money, which is borrowed money, and he's buying all of these things with money that he's borrowing, and he's using his women, these girls that he's abusing, as some kind of leverage.
Well, that's one theory. It goes back to what I said, is that what was the primary goal? Was it this accumulation of wealth, and this trafficking was the derivative of it, or was it the other way around? Okay. And I think if we can figure that out, a lot of this will start making sense.
Exactly.
Okay?
I mean, I say this because, frankly, there is a Ponzi scheme quality.
Yeah, I agree.
To Epstein's biography and to what we've learned about him. I mean, there's this enormous appearance of wealth, a sort of Gatsby-like wealth, but no real explanation for it, and that is extremely strange.
There's a comment from
I wonder if he ever filed with the IRS.
I mean, the IRS knows all this stuff. Well, but going on the collusion, that you could have a lot of collaborators in this Epstein narrative. White Rabbit says, how many people were involved in the Russia collusion narrative? And that's an interesting point. But I think it proves your point, Peter, Alexander, you guys made. You did have a lot of people involved in the Russiagate hoax, and eventually it unraveled.
Yes.
Because you had, and I think it's because you had so many different loose ends.
Yes.
So in a way, Epstein could involve a lot of people.
Yes.
I think we should take heart knowing that there's so much attention now on it that eventually those loose ends will start to talk and the thing will start to unravel over time. Is that a correct assumption?
Right. I mean, that entirely depends on a willingness, a readiness to investigate this thing properly. But if it is investigated properly, it will unravel.
People are not going to let this go, Alex. I mean, we're not going to let this go. I think people in alternative media will not let this go.
No, I agree.
That's my assumption.
I agree with that.
What you guys think about that?
Well, I guess what we would really need to, a first step beyond the forensic financial transactions, which I think is very doable, and I hope it's being done right now. And I have my gut feeling, it tells me that part of the original indictments, they've already done that stuff. But this Maxwell woman, we really need to hear from her, and if she were some nexus point, then maybe instead of talking about Epstein's orbit, maybe it was Maxwell's orbit. Okay. Yes. And she was the one that was the shaker and mover to make this all happen here. Okay. That's going to be very, very important. And considering her family history, her alleged wealth and connections, I think it would be virtually impossible for her to disappear. Okay, so and maybe we're all getting ahead of our skis. Maybe so much more is going on than we know. I hope so, because I think, to echo what Alexander Mercouris is saying, I'll just say it in a different way, is that these things are knowable if you put your mind to it and you put the resources after it.
All right. And I'm looking at the chat right now, guys, and I'm going to take this comment on the chat from Romeo, even though this is okay, because I kind of agree with what he's saying. And I'm going to read it out to you guys. They got away with JFK and 9/11, you cucks. First of all, Romeo, don't call us cucks. That's just absolutely silly and stupid. But I will take your comment, because I think there's a point there in that a lot of people, with Epstein, it brings back JFK, brings back 9/11, it brings back Russiagate, and the distrust that a lot of people now have with what's going on in the news and the media.
And this is what we've said from the very, very beginning.
Yes.
It's this erosion of trust. That's
Absolutely.
Why do you think? I don't know who sent in the comment. Why do you think we're talking about this?
Exactly.
Huh? Do you think I have a vendetta against the Epstein? No, I don't. But there seems to be credible allegations of abuse, and I think that it's incumbent upon us as concerned citizens to want to know what happened. All right, and I think that's it. I'm not trying to go after Bill Clinton here. I'm not trying to go after Trump. I'm not. All right. And I'm not hoping for a victory or a loss for Barr. I'm not. Serious allegations have been made by serious people. So I think we're acting in a very sober and measured way here. So I'm not invoking JFK. I'm not invoking 9/11. That was part of the question. It's not part of my answer.
Taking a step back, Peter Alexander, is Epstein the breaking point of all these lies that we have been fed over so many years? Iraq, Libya, Syria, JFK, not all of these stories that we've always had to deal with as news watchers, as people.
It's just another layer. Okay?
Yes,
just another
this may
layer.
be the one that, I mean, are we getting to a boiling point? Is my question, because I mean, sooner or later there has to be a breaking point where people just say, for fuck's sake, this is enough. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting at?
Yeah, but what do you think the mainstream media's mission is? What it is, it's always to keep us under control. Okay, so we'll see how they deal with it here. That's the single biggest disappointment. I've said this so many times on Crosstalk, is that in the past the media did play a positive function, and now they no longer do. They are just activists. They're just activists, and that's why alternative media has spawned. That's why we're doing these podcasts, because we're trying to cut through it. We're trying to do it in an honest way. I'm not doing it in a partisan way, and I refuse to go really out on the limb. Okay, I am more than willing to speculate with a question coming in what I think about it, and I think I've shown an enormous amount of skepticism on everything. That's what my life's mission is, to be skeptical. All right, give me facts that I can chew on and make a reasonable assessment. But to get to the point, the kernel of the question is that yes, this is showing that the public, because it is so badly informed and misdirected, that it is driving people nuts. It really is. Okay. And what bothers me more than anything else is that it makes everyone, it makes people turn off in a way, to participate. Then you huddle in with your little clan and your tribe when you're disconnected from the outside. I mean, I call myself a conservative, and people don't understand what that is. What conservatism is all about is being able to commune with the people around you in a way that you feel comfortable and you find meaning. Okay, that's the simplest definition here. And what the liberal media has done is destroy all of those bonds and links. And so when we have such a bizarre story as this, their hair gets on fire, because what we get in the mainstream media is partisan, and it's combative. And they have less interest in facts than scoring points for their side. That's why we are doing this. Going back to what we talked about with Hong Kong, I'm just trying to be dispassionate, tell you what the geopolitical lay of the land is, okay? I'm not rooting for anyone, and I'm not condemning anyone. And that's what we're trying to do.
Alexander?
Yes, I agree with Peter. I think that this is going to be one added factor in the steady erosion of trust that we see in the United States and across the West. in the political and establishment that has been governing us for a long time now. And can I just say, I don't think this is actually the tipping point. I don't think Epstein in isolation will be the tipping point. I think it will be an accumulation of things over time. But I think where you're really going to see people begin to get very, very angry is if things start going very seriously wrong in the economy. And then, as I said, at that point, if they feel that the economy isn't working and they are already mistrustful, that's where you could start to see real problems.
Yeah, the Epstein story is just it's corrosive. It's just more corrosive to trust. Yeah.
It's corrosive. That's right.
Okay, we're on 2 hours. Guys, if you haven't hit the like button, click that like button and smash that like button. Share the channel with everybody you know. Let's get to the final super chats and we'll wrap this up. Let's see, where did I leave off? Okay, this is off Epstein. We're going to get back to Epstein to the super chats, but this is off Epstein. This is from Milos, and it's on Kosovo. Comment on Kosovo Prime Minister war crime allegation, organ trafficking, etc., and stealing Serbian national heritage on Kosovo by Kosovo government.
Well, what I will simply say about this is that the Kosovo Liberation Army, of which this person was once a member, was at one time considered to be a terrorist organization. And I've heard terrible things about the record of that organization and the people involved in it. And I am hearing terrible things about Kosovo itself and about the conditions there and how it's become a sort of hub for drugs trafficking and organized crime and all kinds of things.
As I predicted when some countries unilaterally recognize it.
Exactly,
I predicted that.
Exactly. Now, I'm not going to discuss specific allegations because, as we said before, and on this program, there's always a presumption of innocence. But the reality of Kosovo on the ground is apparently extremely bad and getting worse.
Okay, I'm glad that was brought up because I did my homework before we started here. I did a quick review of everything that I read during the day, and I came across this little pearl here. This is from RT's Newsline. Let me read it to you, the headline. U.S., 4 European states want restart of Serbia-Kosovo talks, say status quo is not sustainable. Duh, I could have told you that years ago. It's ridiculous, okay? It's still haunting. Yes. It's haunting us all. Yes. The slaughter that broke up Yugoslavia, the attack unwarranted under international law against Serbia, the forcible detachment of Kosovo from Serbia against international law in violation of UN Security Council resolutions. Okay, and now what? In 2019, 2019, they're saying basically, oops, we need to reopen this. Yeah, this is again. I go back to our China discussion, okay? These kind of unilateral decisions from outsiders always make things worse, okay? And now they're even admitting it.
This was in today's news?
Yeah, right now, today, 13th August at 15:14 GMT time, okay? Very, very timely.
Well, I'm going to throw this out there. You know, this also goes back to Epstein in a way and what we're talking about, because I can tell you sitting here in Cyprus and in Greece that a lot of the drugs, a lot of the trafficking, a lot of the sex trafficking, a lot of the drugs, they go, especially the drugs, they'll move from Afghanistan via Kosovo into the US. And many times they say they move through Arkansas. And who was in Arkansas? Who was running Arkansas? I don't need to say the name. Everyone in the chat knows who. Once again, I'm speculating. This is what I've heard.
Okay, let me just tackle that without mentioning names.
Right.
Look, we got to be very careful here. Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, this is a political score that people want to settle. Okay, I could give a damn about Bill Clinton. Okay, I really don't care. But don't get confused and blinded by looking at nefarious facts on the ground and trying to connect it to your political agenda. And people way too often do that. Okay, so we need to take a breath. We need to step back. Oh, take a breath. I want to change the topic, Frito. Because I was on CNN and I debated Chris Cuomo.
That's right.
He is Frito. He's the stupid brother. Okay.
That was on MH. That was on an MH17 segment, correct?
Yeah. And I won 90% of the comments. Okay, but he is really just a poster child for neoliberalism gone wrong for the and it's for the privilege. Okay, they're the ones that benefit from it. He really is Frito. He really is the stupid brother. Okay, and I had never heard it ever had any kind of racial connotation at all. When I heard it, it was the Godfather and Frito was the stupid brother. It's pretty simple, Chris Cuomo. Get your head around it, okay? I mean, your behavior, you're so privileged, aren't you? I guess you got triggered. That was a microaggression, wasn't it? You're really a victim of your own stupid ideological possession, Chris Cuomo.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I remember that interview, Peter. You crushed him. And going off of the Cuomo thing, because we talked about the hunt and the Cuomo, we have a super chat from Winter Wind. Jack Pozovic has the hunt script. It was on his Twitter this morning.
I'm not surprised.
All right. And a super chat from Renat. Are you not sick of the American politics interferences and supporting the war industry? ? I am.
I am.
We all are, I think.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. I think everyone in this live stream is.
You wouldn't be listening to it unless you're, here for nefarious purposes, which it happens from time to time. But most people come here because that's what we believe that absolutely to our core.
Yes.
And from Goberwala in the chat, care to comment on what's going on in Argentine elections?
Yes, I think this is a fascinating story.
Yeah,
we need to discuss it at considerable length because I've been reading the financial press and I again find that this must be the world upside down because Mr. Macri, who is the president of Argentina, is being represented as this great, solid financial wizard who has stabilized Argentina.
And took the biggest loan in IMF history. Great.
The biggest loan in
IMF. Real wizard.
Exactly. Yeah. The inflation is higher than it was when he came in. Economic growth is lower. Unemployment is worse. And of course, the currency has been devaluing on a spectacular basis. Of course, he's losing the election. How can anybody be surprised at this? And I am not in the slightest bit surprised that he is losing this election in Argentina. And again, I ask myself, how is it possible for newspapers like the Financial Times, which is the one I read when I'm talking about the financial press, but I also read others, to so completely get this thing about Argentina so completely and entirely wrong. Anyway, we'll discuss this properly at some point.
I think this needs its own video as well.
Yes. Always reminds me of Gomer Pyle. I don't know, I'm really dating myself. Remember, surprise, surprise, surprise. Okay, I mean, that's how I react to the mainstream media all the time. I mean, because Gomer Pyle is in charge. Great.
All right. Let's get to the last two super chats, and they are on Epstein. From Lord Brett Sinclair, super chat. If you murder your assets, you will eventually have a lot of trouble recruiting. That is why he could be alive. This goes back to the theory that he has escaped.
Well, that is true. I mean, of course, as I said, it is a theory, but I would say that intelligence services do murder assets, and it's surprising, and it is surprising how many people, nonetheless, still come forward because they're attracted to that sort of thing. There are some very, very interesting people out there who are prepared to do all sorts of remarkable things and accept the extraordinary risks of doing it. And any person, normal people, don't really understand that. I don't understand that. But the kind of people who are drawn to this sort of world are not normal, are abnormal almost by definition.
Okay, and also if you want to go on the side of escape, then who is the dead body?
Yeah.
Who is it? I mean, I would imagine that Epstein left enough of his DNA material around the world that you could be able to make sure it was him. Okay, so
Yeah.
Who's the dead guy then?
Who is the dead guy? Quite so, Peter.
All right. The final super chat from Lechat. Is Maxwell the next to hang? She knows all the clients. We don't know.
We don't know, but if I were her, I would have a security detail. But you know, Ms. Maxwell, it didn't help Jeffrey much, did it?
No.
Alexander, we did a video on Maxwell's family.
Indeed, we did.
What an interesting family. What an interesting story she has.
Oh, she has an extraordinary story. And again, one does wonder whether that doesn't provide some explanation or at least some background to her involvement with Epstein, because of course, so many of the same sort of questions swirled around Robert Maxwell, her father, as around Epstein. Now, Robert Maxwell, I want to stress this, I never heard any allegations of sexual abuse against him. But I mean, he was a most remarkable businessman, a man who engaged in quite extreme forms of financial fraud, for which he was eventually, as I said, exposed, and who died a very mysterious and still unexplained death, and who also had all kinds of connections to the intelligence agencies of all sorts of countries. In his case, by the way, that is not disputed. He definitely was involved with the world of intelligence in ways that has still not really been.
There are rumors he was a triple agent, correct, Alexander?
There are rumors that he was a triple agent, that he was working for the British, the Russians, and the Israelis all at the same time. And that seems remarkable. And that was during the Cold War. But he did have contacts with the USSR and Britain and Israel in most remarkable ways. So he inhabited this very strange world. And one does wonder whether Ghislaine, if that's how you pronounce her name, Ghislaine Maxwell, wasn't partly drawn to Epstein because she saw some of the same activities with Epstein that she was already used to with her father. I don't know, and one shouldn't try and guess. But she does come from a very remarkable family and a very remarkable background. I doubt, by the way, that was what interested Epstein in her, these similarities. I suspect that he saw in Maxwell a bridge to people in England, important people in England. And I'm sure that was what she was originally there to provide him with.
Yeah, she was a socialite between London and New York.
Absolutely.
A conduit.
Absolutely, exactly. That's what I think that was all about. Whether she was involved in criminal activities, well, there are huge numbers of rumors out there, stories out there, claims out there, but I stress again, there are no charges at the moment, and we shouldn't rush to any conclusions.
Yeah, but the Maxwell family is a giant name in the UK, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, to a degree that is not, I think, easily explained to people outside Britain. I mean, Robert Maxwell, who was the patriarch of the family, is a larger-than-life figure in British politics, British business, and British scandals. And of course, he was in intelligence also.
All right. And I think we lost Peter, but we have a picture of Peter with Putin. Now he's on the, now I see you.
No, I'm low battery. So we got to end this now.
Okay. That was our last super chat. That was our last comment on Maxwell. And we are finishing up. So Peter, I dare to ask you, what are the news stories that you're looking at?
I'm looking at everything. Since I'm on vacation now, I spend my long mornings with coffee, just going through the American Conservative, going through antiwar.com, Zero Hedge. So I'm gobbling up everything left and right. Okay, that article I sent on Kashmir. I mean, I was lucky to find that it was very long. And I want to revisit that because I think it's a fascinating story that the mainstream media gets fundamentally wrong.
Yeah.
Alexander, what do you? looking at?
Well, Hong Kong is obviously a huge story at the moment. I think we are still looking at the swirl of scandal in the United States. Epstein, Russiagate, Michael Horowitz's report is supposed to be coming out at the end of August.
Yeah.
All sorts of things going on there. And I'm sorry to say it, Peter, I'm afraid Brexit is also rumbling away.
I was hoping we'd get through this without Brexit. I was really hoping we'd get through
Poor Peter. But nonetheless, we are heading into a most bizarre and strange political crisis in Britain, which we need to keep an eye on. Germany is now almost certainly in recession. And this is coming at a time when the political situation in Germany is becoming extremely fragile. There's probably elections. I believe there's elections coming up in Israel. We need to look at those. And of course, there's Kashmir.
All right. And we'll wrap it up with our live 43, which was an incredible live.
Well,
thank you to Peter Lavelle, host of RT's Crosstalk in Moscow. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you to Alexander Mercouris, the Oracle of London in London. Thank you, Alexander, very much. And thank you to everyone in the live stream. Remember, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. Remember to hit the like button, share the channel with everybody you know. You can donate to us on PayPal, Patreon, and Subscribestar. The link is in the description box down below. And of course, you can buy awesome merchandise on the Duran shop. Alexander is wearing a Duran polo. He has a Duran mug. I also have a Duran mug as well. And I also have a free Assange shirt. We haven't forgotten about Assange.
No, not at all.
So let's not forget about Assange as well, free Assange. All right, guys, thank you very much. We hope you have a really good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much.